A racist white cop punches an old black lady, but when she calmly looks up from the ground and reveals she's actually FBI, his entire world comes crashing down. What he thought was just another routine street stop turns out to be part of a months-long federal investigation, one that's been watching him. And now she's giving him a choice: expose the corruption inside his own department, or protect the blue wall and go down with it. But this isn't just about one mistake, because the woman he hit, she's been gathering names, money trails, and secrets that could burn the whole system down. And the deeper he goes, the more he realizes his own father might have been involved all along. The question is no longer if he'll pay for what he did, it's how. When justice knocks on your own door, do you open it or run? The morning sun cast long shadows across Haven Ridge's main street as Mark Delaney adjusted his patrol car's mirror, his jaw tight with tension. The command meeting still rang in his ears, 2 hours of being told to watch their community optics while somehow doing more with less money. Can you believe that meeting? Trent Maddox lounged in the passenger seat, his perfectly pressed uniform a stark contrast to his casual smirk. All this fuss over a few complaints, like we're the bad guys here. Mark grunted, keeping his eyes on the road. The coffee in his stomach felt acidic, burning with leftover frustration from watching the chief dance around words like sensitivity and de-escalation. I mean, certain folks just don't understand how things work in their own neighborhoods, Trent continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. They move in, then act surprised when we have to maintain order. The radio crackled with a minor disturbance call from Miller's Corner Market. Mark flipped on the lights, grateful for any action to break the morning's tension. They pulled up to find a small crowd gathering outside the worn brick storefront. At its center stood an elderly black woman, one hand gripping a wooden cane, the other clutching a small paper bag of groceries. "Ma'am, what seems to be the problem?" Mark approached, noting how the woman's calm demeanor somehow made him more irritated. "The clerk gave me incorrect change," Loretta Gaines replied, her voice steady and dignified. "I'm simply asking him to count it again." The store clerk, a skinny teenager, watched nervously from the doorway. The crowd pressed closer, murmuring. "Let's see some ID," Mark demanded, feeling Trent's presence behind him like a prod. "Certainly." Loretta's eyes remained observant, taking in every detail of their faces, their postures. She moved with deliberate slowness. "Come on, speed it up," Trent called out. "We don't have all day." Mark felt sweat prickling at his collar. Something about this woman's composure made him feel small, defensive. The watching crowd didn't help. "I have my receipt right here," Loretta said, reaching for her purse. "Hey," Mark barked, his heart suddenly racing. "Keep your hands where I can see them." But Loretta continued her careful movement toward the bag. In that split second, Mark's world narrowed to a tunnel of imagined threats and wounded pride. His arm shot out before his brain could stop it. The impact was sickeningly solid. Loretta crumpled, her cane clattering against the sidewalk. Groceries spilled across the concrete, bread, milk, eggs breaking open in slow motion. The crowd gasped as one. Mark stood frozen, his hand still clenched, staring at what he'd done. Loretta lay on her side, breathing carefully, her dignity intact even on the ground. She didn't scream or wail. She simply looked at him with eyes that saw straight through to his soul. "Oh my God," someone whispered. Then came the distinctive sound of a phone camera starting to record. Mark turned to see several phones pointed his way, their red lights accusing. The morning sun suddenly felt too bright, too exposing. "Someone call an ambulance!" A woman's voice rang out. Trent stepped forward, trying to take control. "All right, everyone back up. Police business, clear the area." But the crowd held their ground, phones steady, faces hard with judgment. In the distance, sirens began their mournful wail. Mark stood rooted to the spot, his career flashing before his eyes. But worse than any professional consequences was the shame burning in his chest as he watched Loretta struggle to sit up, refusing help, her eyes never leaving his face. The sirens grew louder, and Mark finally found his voice. "Ma'am, But there were no words to fix what he'd done. The morning sun caught the spilled milk spreading across the sidewalk, turning it into a mirror that reflected back exactly who he was in this moment. The ambulance's fluorescent interior made Mark's uniform look sickly green. He sat on the metal bench, hands clasped so tight his knuckles went white, watching the paramedics work. Their gentle touches only highlighted his violence. Loretta Gaines reclined on the stretcher, her dignity intact, despite the angry red mark blooming across her cheekbone. Her cane rested beside her, a simple wooden one that matched her sensible shoes. She barely winced as they checked her wrist for sprains. "Officer," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I'll need your name and badge number for my records." Mark's throat went dry. "Sergeant Mark Delaney, badge 2476. She nodded as if taking mental notes, no trace of fear or begging in her manner. The calm unnerved him more than screaming would have. At the emergency room, everything moved in a blur of forms and procedures. Mark's supervisor, Captain Reynolds, burst through the waiting room doors, face flushed with anger and barely contained panic. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Reynolds hissed. "There's already footage online. The mayor's office is calling." Mark expected handcuffs any moment. Instead, Loretta's voice carried from behind the curtain. "I'd like to speak with Sergeant Delaney. Privately, please." The nurse hesitated, then drew the pale blue curtain closed. Mark stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed while Loretta adjusted herself to sit upright. With careful movements, she reached into an inner pocket of her cardigan. The credential wallet was worn leather, soft from years of use. When it flipped open, Mark's world tilted sideways. "Special Agent Loretta Gaines, Federal Bureau of Investigation," she said quietly, holding his gaze. Mark's stomach plummeted. The room seemed to shrink around him as understanding crashed in. He had assaulted a federal agent. "I've been living in Haven Ridge since March," she continued, tucking the credentials away, "under what you might call a grandmother cover, attending church suppers, shopping at corner markets, watching patterns." A man in a dark suit appeared at the curtain's edge, another federal agent who nodded at Loretta before speaking. "We'll need Officer Delaney's body camera preserved immediately." "Of course," Mark managed to say, though his mouth felt stuffed with cotton. Loretta's steady gaze never wavered. "I wasn't trying to bait you today, Sergeant. I was simply doing my job, investigating reports of missing evidence and witness intimidation connected to your department. The fact that you lost control over a simple receipt, well, that tells its own story, doesn't it?" Mark stood frozen, years of training useless in the face of this quiet, formidable woman. "You have a choice to make," she said. "You can tell the truth about today, about what you've seen in your department, about all of it. Help us stop the corruption that's poisoning this town, or you can lie, cover up, protect the wrong people, and be swallowed by it all." Through the window, Mark could hear raised voices outside the hospital, angry community members already gathering. His career, his freedom, his whole life hung by a thread. "Tomorrow morning," Loretta said. "Sunrise. Meet me at Miller's Diner. We'll discuss your options." She settled back against the pillows, dismissing him with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. Mark stumbled out of the emergency room into the humid evening air. Phone cameras turned to follow him. Someone shouted, "Shame!" He made it to his patrol car just as the first news van pulled into the parking lot, its satellite dish reaching toward the darkening sky like an accusing finger. His hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel. In a single moment of anger, he had not only attacked an elderly woman, he had struck an FBI agent, and now she held his fate in her steady, certain hands. Mark's eyes burned from lack of sleep as he pulled into the police station parking lot. The morning sun felt too bright, like a spotlight on his shame. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the steering wheel, the events of yesterday playing on endless repeat in his mind. The station's familiar brick walls felt different today, hostile. As he walked through the front doors, conversations died. Eyes darted away. Officer Chen, who usually greeted him with a smile, suddenly needed to organize files. Captain Reynolds met him at his desk. Administrative duty until further notice. No patrol, no public contact. Internal affairs want statements from everyone by end of day. Mark nodded numbly, his throat too tight for words. He headed to the locker room to change, hoping for a moment alone. But Trent was waiting, leaning against the metal lockers with forced casualness. "Hey, partner," Trent said, checking that they were alone. "About yesterday's report. We need to keep it simple, you know. That crowd was getting hostile. The old lady was acting aggressive, reaching into her bag." Mark's stomach churned as he opened his locker, avoiding Trent's eyes. "Look," Trent continued, voice dropping, lower. These things happen. But if we stick together, follow the playbook. He clapped Mark's shoulder. Just let me do the talking. The pressure in Trent's words was unmistakable. Mark mumbled something non-committal and checked his watch. 6:45. The highway diner sat alone off Route 16, its neon sign dim in the morning light. Mark chose a booth in the back, away from the few scattered truckers nursing coffee. His hands wouldn't stop, shaking as he waited. At exactly 7 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Loretta Gaines entered, wearing a powder blue cardigan and practical brown shoes. The bruise on her cheek had darkened overnight. She walked with her cane, unhurried and dignified, as if this were any normal breakfast meeting. "Coffee, please," she told the waitress. "Black." Her voice was steady, her manner composed. Mark couldn't meet her eyes. The shame felt like it would choke him. "Officer Delaney," she said quietly once they were alone. "Look at me." He forced himself to raise his head. Her gaze was direct, unflinching. "Let me be clear about what's happening in your department," she began. She laid out the facts like pieces on a chessboard, evidence vanishing from lockup, arrests that didn't add up, a pattern of pressure and payoffs protected by a careful inner circle. "You're not our target," she said. "Not yet, but that changes if you choose to help cover this up." A waitress refilled their coffee. Mark wrapped his hands around the warm mug, trying to steady himself. "The path forward is strict," Loretta continued. "First, you will formally admit what you did. No excuses, no creative editing of events." Mark nodded slowly. "Second, you will not falsify any paperwork, regardless of pressure from others. Your body camera footage needs to be preserved exactly as is." "They'll destroy me," Mark whispered. "You did that yourself," Loretta replied, not unkindly. "But you can choose what happens next." She reached into her purse and slid a basic flip phone across the table. "This is secure. Call me before you talk to anyone else about yesterday, no exceptions." Mark stared at the phone, understanding the weight of what it represented. After a long moment, he picked it up and slipped it into his pocket. "I'll cooperate," he said quietly. His voice cracked on the words. Loretta nodded once, satisfied. "Remember, Officer Delaney, there's no hero edit coming, only accountability, but that's where healing starts." The evening sun cast long shadows across Mark's driveway as he pulled up to his house. His hand lingered on the steering wheel, stomach churning at the sight of Diane's car already there. The porch light was on, waiting for him like an accusation. Inside, Diane sat at their kitchen table, her phone face down beside her. She looked up when he entered, her eyes holding none of their usual warmth. The silence stretched between them like a wall. "Pastor Mike called," she said finally, her voice steady but tired. "And Sarah. And half the prayer circle." She pushed her graying hair behind her ear, a nervous habit he knew well. They saw the video. Mark's throat tightened. He sank into the chair across from her, his uniform suddenly feeling like it belonged to someone else. "Diane, I don't." She held up her hand. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened. No excuses about stress or budget cuts or whatever story you've been telling yourself." The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the quiet. Through the window, a neighbor's porch light flickered on, reminding Mark how exposed they were, how quickly word traveled in Haven Ridge. "I hit her," he said finally, the words scraping his throat. She was just standing there, arguing about change from the store. She reached for her purse, and I hit her. She wasn't threatening anyone. She was using a cane, for God's sake. Diane's hands clenched around her coffee mug. "The woman we saw at Miller's last month? The one who always wears those flowered dresses?" Mark nodded, shame burning his face. "Look at me, Mark." Diane's voice cracked slightly. "What happened to the man I married? The one who helped Mrs. Johnson across the street every Sunday? The one who promised in that little chapel, right where your mama used to pray, that he'd be a protector?" Her words hit harder than any punch. Mark remembered that day, the sunlight through the stained glass, his mother's proud tears, Diane's hand warm in his as they made their vows. "I don't know," he whispered. "I don't know when I got so angry. That's not good enough anymore." Diane stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "You've been hiding behind bad days for years now, making excuses, blaming everyone else. Your mother raised you better than this." She walked to the window, arms wrapped around herself. "I've watched you getting harder, more suspicious. But this?" She turned back to him, eyes bright with tears. "This isn't stress, Mark. This is something ugly, and you need to face it." The truth of her words settled like stones in his stomach. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, his brothers in blue, patrolling without him. He could almost feel the town's judgment pressing in through the walls. Later, sitting alone on the dark porch, Mark pulled out the burner phone Loretta had given him. His fingers hovered over the keys before typing, "No report. Filed yet. Following instructions." The response came quickly. "Good. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late." The next morning's sun felt too bright as Mark drove to his mandatory counseling session. The office was in a converted Victorian house, all dark wood and worn carpet. The therapist, Dr. Chen, had kind eyes and a direct manner that left no room for deflection. "Tell me about your anger, Mark," she said, notepad balanced on her knee. He shifted in, the overstuffed chair. "I'm not an angry person. A peaceful person doesn't strike an elderly woman." Her words were gentle but firm. "What were you afraid of in that moment?" "I wasn't afraid," he started, but the lie tasted bitter. He remembered Loretta's eyes, calm and knowing, seeing right through him at the hospital. I was afraid of losing control, of looking weak. And what do you think about when you see someone who doesn't look like you, doesn't come from your neighborhood?" The question hung in the air. Mark's hands clenched on the armrests as truth fought its way past years of denial. "I think danger, threat, even when there isn't one, even when it's just a grandmother buying groceries." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "That's what we call bias, Mark, and naming it is the first step to changing it." Back home, Mark sat at his kitchen table, a blank piece of paper before him. His hand shook as he picked up the pen. This wasn't for social media or the department file. This was for his soul. "Dear Ms. Gaines," he wrote, then crossed it out. "Dear Loretta." His pen moved slowly, carefully. Each word weighted with the truth he'd finally spoken aloud in Dr. Chen's office. The afternoon light slanted through the windows as Mark bent over his letter, writing not to save his job or his reputation, but to find his way back to the man he used to be, the one his mother had believed in, the one Diane had married, the one who had somehow gotten lost along the way. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Mark slipped through the side door. His stomach churned at the sight of rows of metal folding chairs, already half filled with familiar faces. These were people he'd seen at grocery stores, gas stations, and school events. Now they watched him like a stranger. He chose a spot near the back, trying to make himself small. The metal chair creaked under his weight. More residents filed in, mothers clutching purses close, elderly men with stern faces, teenagers filming with phones. The room held its breath when Loretta entered quietly, settling into a chair among her neighbors. She adjusted an ice pack nestled against her bruised cheek, hidden partially by a paisley scarf. Mayor Wilson stepped to the podium, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by grave concern. "We're here tonight because our community is hurting. What happened yesterday has shaken our trust. Everyone who wishes to speak will be heard." One by one they came forward. Mrs. Thompson, who taught 3rd grade, spoke about her grandson being afraid to walk to school. Mr. Jenkins, a Vietnam veteran, removed his cap and described feeling betrayed by someone who wore the same uniform he'd once died to protect. Sarah Chen from the corner bakery shared how her elderly mother now refused to shop alone. "I've lived here 40 years, said an older black woman, her voice trembling. "I shouldn't have to feel scared to reach in my purse for my wallet. None of us should." Mark's chest tightened with each story. These weren't angry protesters or faceless critics. They were his neighbors, showing him the ripples of fear from his single violent act. "Officer Delaney," Mayor Wilson called out, "please stand." Mark's legs felt wooden as he rose. The room went silent except for the hum of the heating vents, dozens of eyes fixed on him, some angry, some sad, all waiting. He cleared his throat. No excuses came, no explanations formed. There was only the truth, bare and burning. "I was wrong," he said, his voice rough. "I hurt her." The words hung in the air, simple and damning. The silence held. No one clapped. No one shouted. But something in the room's tension shifted slightly, like a door cracking open to let in a whisper of fresh air. After the meeting, Mark pushed through the double doors into the cool night. Circles of yellow light from the parking lot lamps pooled on the asphalt. He loosened his tie, desperate for air. "Mark?" The voice was deep and measured. Pastor Samuel Crow stood nearby, his kind face serious in the shadowy light. "Pastor," Mark managed, straightening slightly. "Walk with me a moment." Pastor Crow gestured toward the edge of the lot. His weathered hands were clasped behind his back as they walked. "You're expecting forgiveness tonight." "No, Mark started. "Good, because forgiveness isn't owed to anyone. It can't be demanded or rushed." The pastor stopped under a lamp, turning to face Mark. "Real change doesn't start with forgiveness, it starts with service, with showing up to do the work, especially when it's uncomfortable." He pulled a clipboard from his worn leather briefcase. "The church pantry needs volunteers, 8 a.m. sharp, Monday through Friday. You'll be working under Miss Gloria's supervision and she won't coddle you. But she'll teach you if you're willing to learn." Mark stared at the volunteer sign-up sheet. His pen hovered over the line. "This isn't community service for show," Pastor Crow added quietly. "This is about choosing to serve people who don't owe you anything. Not their trust, not their smiles, not their forgiveness." Mark signed his name. From across the lot, he caught Loretta watching. She gave a slight, careful nod before turning away. The scrape of shoes on pavement made Mark turn. Trent leaned against Mark's car, arms crossed. "Making friends with the church crowd now?" Trent's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Better watch yourself, partner. Going soft like this, it'll get you crushed inside the department. You know how it works." The morning sun hadn't quite burned through the fog when Mark pulled into Hope Chapel's parking lot. His watch read 7:45. The brick building looked different now than it had during happier visits. Smaller somehow, more imposing. The smell of coffee and something metallic, probably canned goods, drifted from the open side door. Mark tugged at his jacket collar, feeling exposed without his uniform. He'd chosen plain clothes, worn jeans and a navy work jacket that still had paint spots from helping Diane with the garage last spring. That felt like a lifetime ago now. "You're early." The voice came from behind him, gruff but not unkind. Mark turned to find an older Asian-American man studying him with sharp eyes. Despite a noticeable limp, the man's posture spoke of military bearing. "Harold Kimball," the man said, extending a weathered hand. "Pastor Sam said you'd be coming." Mark shook the offered hand. "Mark Delaney. I know who you are." Harold's expression didn't change. "Everyone does. Follow me." The pantry was bigger than Mark expected, with neat rows of shelves stretching back into the shadows. Cardboard boxes waited in stacks near a loading dock. "Rules are simple," Harold said, picking up a box cutter. "No speeches, no feeling sorry for yourself, and don't expect anyone to pat you on the back for being here." He pointed to the boxes. "Start unloading those. Sort by expiration date. Newest goes in back." Mark nodded and got to work. His back twinged as he lifted the first box. He wasn't used to this kind of labor anymore. The cardboard was heavy with canned vegetables. By 8:30, people started arriving. Mostly seniors, some with canes or walkers, a few younger folks who kept their eyes down. Mark recognized faces from his patrols, but saw them differently now. These weren't statistics or potential problems. They were just people trying to get by. "Need help with those bags, Mrs. Chen?" Harold called out to a tiny woman struggling with 2 heavy sacks. Before Harold could move, Mark stepped forward. "I can take those to your car, ma'am." Mrs. Chen hesitated, then nodded. As they walked to her ancient Corolla, she told him about her arthritis, her grandson's college applications, the rising cost of everything. Mark listened, really listened, maybe for the first time in years. More stories followed with each trip to the parking lot. Mr. Jackson's wife was having surgery next week. The Rodriguez twins were finally walking. Miss Annie's daughter just made manager at the grocery store. Around 10, Mark noticed Loretta slip in through the side door. She moved naturally among the volunteers, checking inventory lists, adjusting displays. No one treated her like an outsider or a victim. This was clearly her space too. During a quiet moment, she drifted over to where Mark was breaking down empty boxes. "The pantry matters more than you know," she said softly, her bruised cheek still visible despite careful makeup. "These families, they're the ones who can't fight back when things go wrong. When evidence disappears, when arrests don't add up, they can't risk making waves." Mark's stomach clenched. He thought of all the times he dismissed complaints, assumed guilt, taken the easy route. "Take 5 minutes if you need air," Harold called out. "Then we've got another delivery coming." Grateful, Mark stepped outside. The morning had warmed up, but his throat felt tight. Movement across the street caught his eye. Trent was there, talking and laughing with Bill Myers, a local contractor. Something passed between them. An envelope slipped quickly into Trent's pocket. Mark's heart rate spiked. He pulled out his phone, typed one word to Loretta's burner number. "Envelope." Her reply came almost instantly. "Say nothing. Remember everything." Inside, the pantry bustled with activity. Mark picked up another box, his hands steadier now. The work was simple, honest, maybe truth could be too. "Those cans won't sort themselves," Harold said, passing by with his slight limp. "And watch the dents. We don't serve anything we wouldn't eat ourselves." Mark nodded and got back to work. One box at a time, one truth at a time. Maybe that was how change really happened. The winter afternoon faded into dusk as Mark pulled his car into Riverside Park. The empty playground equipment cast long shadows across fresh snow, and the swings creaked softly in the cold breeze. He spotted Loretta's sensible grey sedan parked near the picnic tables, deliberately choosing a spot several spaces away. They met like strangers might, a careful distance apart, both pretending to admire the frozen creek. Mark's breath came out in white puffs as he described what he'd witnessed outside the pantry. "Trent was talking to Bobby Chen from Chen Construction," Mark said quietly. "They were laughing like old friends. Then I saw it, an envelope, passed real smooth, like they'd done it 100 times before. Bobby tucked it in his jacket pocket and walked away like nothing happened." Loretta nodded, her lined face thoughtful, as she leaned on her cane. "Bobby Chen's company has won 6 municipal contracts in the past year, all under bid, all rushed through approval." She paused, watching a cardinal land on the monkey bars. "But that's just the surface." She turned to face him fully. "We've tracked a pattern. Seized cash that never makes it to evidence. Incident reports that vanish when certain names come up. And something worse, people from struggling neighborhoods pressured to plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit. The threat is always the same. Fight the charges and risk everything, or take a deal and keep quiet." Mark's stomach churned. "How deep does it go?" "Deep enough that we've been building this case for months." Loretta adjusted her scarf, wincing slightly at the movement. "But we do this right. By the book. No rushed moves, no dramatic gestures. Just documented truth, piece by piece." The metal playground equipment pinged as it contracted in the cold. Mark nodded slowly. "I understand." Back at the station, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Mark settled at his temporary desk in records. The familiar weight of his service weapon was absent, part of his administrative leave restrictions. He'd barely opened his email when Trent's reflection appeared in his computer screen. "There you are, partner." Trent's voice was friendly, but his eyes were hard. He perched on the edge of Mark's desk, a manila folder in his hands. "Brass is worried about this situation. They want it handled quietly. You know how these things can spiral." He slid the folder across the desk. Inside was a blank incident report form. "Just need your statement on what happened. Keep it simple. Confused subject. Aggressive movements. Officer safety response. We've all been there." Mark stared at the form, his throat tight. "I need to talk to my union rep first. Maybe get some legal advice." The warmth drained from Trent's face. He leaned in close, voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen carefully. Small towns have long memories. Today you're a good cop who made one mistake. Tomorrow, who knows what old complaints might surface, what witnesses might remember differently. Think about your pension, your family." Mark met his gaze steadily. "I'll think about it, but I'm not signing anything today. Your choice." Trent straightened up, adjusting his tie. "Just remember, we all sink or swim together here." Later that night, Mark stood in his dark garage, gripping his workbench as he held the burner phone to his ear. The familiar smell of motor oil and sawdust usually calmed him, but not tonight. "He threatened me," Mark said quietly. "Not directly, but the message was clear. Document everything," Loretta replied. "Times, dates, exact words. And from now on, you check for tails before meeting me. Vary your routes, watch your mirrors." "I never thought—" Mark's voice trailed off. "Most don't until they're in it," Loretta said. "Stay calm, stay focused. We'll—" Mark heard her stop speaking at the same moment he noticed it. the reflection of a car parked at the end of his driveway, headlights dark. Through the garage windows, he could just make out its outline in the streetlight. "Someone's watching my house," he whispered. "Don't react," Loretta said firmly. "Go inside normally. Call if anything changes." The line went dead. Mark stared at the workbench, his tools casting familiar shadows, while the unseen car waited in the darkness beyond his driveway. The Sunday morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of New Hope Baptist Church. Mark Delaney sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, watching congregants climb the worn steps in their Sunday best. His plain blue shirt felt too tight at the collar. He parked far from the entrance, nearly at the street. Each step toward the red brick building seemed to echo. The double doors stood open, welcoming despite his hammering heart. Inside, warm light filtered through stained glass, painting rainbow patches on dark wooden pews. A few heads turned as Mark slipped into the back row. He folded his hands in his lap to hide their trembling and kept his eyes forward. The organ hummed to life. The choir filed in, robes swaying like purple waves. Among the congregation, he spotted Loretta near the front, wearing a cream-colored hat with a silk band. She didn't look back at him. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. The first hymn rose up, voices blending in harmony that seemed to shake the rafters. Mark didn't know the words, but the music wrapped around him anyway. People swayed, some raising hands, others closing their eyes in peaceful surrender. Pastor Crow stepped to the pulpit, his deep voice filling every corner. "Truth," he began, "costs something." The sermon wove through scripture about confession, about walking toward light even when shadows felt safer. Mark's throat tightened as words about pride and humility landed like stones in still water. No one rushed to shake his hand or welcome him. A few older members watched him with careful eyes, not hostile, just aware. A young mother pulled her children closer as they passed his pew. Mark accepted each small pain as earned. Throughout the service, Loretta remained a quiet anchor. Her silver head bowed in prayer, then lifted in song. She wasn't shielding him from discomfort. She was simply there, practicing her own faith in her own space. After the final Amen, Pastor Crow gestured for Mark to follow him. They walked down a narrow hallway into a small office lined with books. A wooden cross hung above a desk, scattered with papers and coffee cups. "Sit," Pastor Crow said, not unkindly. He settled into his chair with a creak. Mark perched on the edge of a worn armchair. Sunlight streamed through a dusty window, warming his shoulder. "I need to say something," Mark started, his voice rough. "I've been carrying prejudice, not just anger or stress or bad training, real prejudice." The words scraped his throat like glass, but they had to come out. Pastor Crow leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "Go on." "I've used it as an excuse, like it was something that happened to me instead of something I chose. But when I hit Ms. Gaines," Mark's hands clenched, "that was my choice, my sin. Naming it matters," Pastor Crow said. "But repentance isn't just words." "No, sir, it's not. Repentance is a direction you walk day after day. Some days you'll walk it well. Other days you'll stumble. But the direction, that's what matters." Mark nodded, throat tight. "I'll keep serving at the pantry, and I'll tell the truth about what's happening in the department even if it costs me my badge." "Good," Pastor Crow said simply. "Not because it earns you anything, but because it's right." They stood, and the pastor walked him to the door. Outside, the congregation had mostly dispersed. A few people lingered on the steps, talking softly in the autumn air. An elderly woman approached Mark, her steps measured and dignified. Without a word, she pressed a folded church bulletin into his hand. Then she turned and walked away, her sensible shoes clicking on the sidewalk. Mark opened the paper. Inside, written in careful script, was a simple prayer. "Lord, help him walk toward you." He stood there holding that small piece of paper, feeling its weight in his palm. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something just as precious. Hope that change was possible, one step at a time. Mark's fingers drummed against his desk, the rhythm matching his quickening pulse. 2 days of routine had passed like molasses, shuffling papers during desk duty, stacking cans at the pantry, waiting for the FBI's wire plan to clear. Now Wednesday afternoon loomed large, the hidden recorder a constant presence against his ribs. He adjusted his shirt for the 10th time, trying not to look obvious. The device felt bulky, foreign against his skin. Loretta's text glowed on his burner phone. Stay normal. Normal. Right. The station hummed with its usual afternoon energy. Officers filed reports, phones rang, and the coffee maker gurgled in the break room. Mark kept his head down, focusing on the stack of incident forms that needed processing. Hey, Delaney. Trent's voice cut through the office noise. Need your help in evidence. Spring cleaning day. Mark's mouth went dry. Sure thing. He stood carefully, mindful of the wire's placement. The evidence room sat in the basement, fluorescent lights casting a sickly glow over metal shelves packed with labeled boxes. Trent shut the door behind them with a soft click. Listen, Trent said, leaning against a filing cabinet. We've got some old cases that need organizing. You know how it goes. Paperwork gets messy, things fall through cracks. Mark forced his breathing to stay steady. What kind of cases? The kind that pay for themselves. Trent's smile didn't reach his eyes. Look, you've been here long enough. You know how it works. Nobody checks chain of custody if the forms look clean. I'm not sure I follow. Mark kept his voice carefully neutral, confused but not challenging. Trent sighed, running a hand through his hair. Come on, Mark. Certain arrests, certain evidence. They're worth something to the right people. Contractors, business owners, folks who appreciate a smooth-running town. And the paperwork just needs adjusting sometimes. Dates, locations, amounts seized. Trent pulled out a stack of evidence bags. Take these drug cases from last month. Simple possession turns into intent to distribute if the numbers change. And who's going to argue? These people can't afford lawyers. Mark's stomach churned. He picked up a bag, pretending to study it. Seems complicated to track. Nah, it's all in the book, Trent chuckled. Every payment, every favor, every protected name, all neat and tidy in black and white. You keep records? Mark tried to sound impressed rather than horrified. Off-site, obviously. Can't have that stuff floating around here. Trent tapped his temple. Smart business means good bookkeeping. They spent the next hour reorganizing evidence, Trent growing more candid with each box. Mark asked careful questions, letting Trent's pride do the talking. Names dropped like stones. Judges, contractors, business owners, all tied to missing evidence and manufactured charges. When Mark finally escaped the basement, his undershirt was damp with sweat. He texted Loretta from his car. Got something. Need to meet. The sun was setting when he pulled into the diner's back lot. Loretta sat in her sensible sedan, reading glasses perched on her nose as she took notes. Tell me everything, she said as he slid into the passenger seat. Word for word, Mark recounted the conversation, watching Loretta's pen scratch across her notepad. Her expression remained neutral, but her writing grew more focused at certain details. The ledger is key, she said finally. But this recording alone won't break the ring. We need that book, and someone willing to testify about its contents. Trent trusts me now, Mark said. Maybe. No. Loretta's voice was firm. You've done enough for today. Don't push too fast. Let him think you're still hesitant, still weighing options. Mark nodded, understanding the wisdom in patience even as anxiety clawed at his chest. The recording felt like a bomb strapped to his ribs. Powerful, but dangerous. Go home, Loretta said softly. Rest. We'll move when the time is right. The drive home felt longer than usual. Streetlights cast orange pools on empty sidewalks, and Mark found himself whispering his mother's favorite prayer. Lord, give me courage to do what's right. He touched the spot where the recorder had been, now safely in FBI hands. The truth was recorded, preserved, waiting. Like a seed planted in dark soil, it would grow toward light when ready. His headlights swept across his driveway, illuminating Diane's flowers still blooming despite the cooling weather. Inside, dinner would be waiting. Normal life continued, even while everything beneath the surface shifted like sand in an hourglass. The garage. Light flickered as Mark pulled the old footlocker from beneath his workbench. Dust coated the American flag, draped across its lid. His hands trembled as he lifted the heavy fabric, folding it with the careful precision he'd learned in basic training. The lock clicked open. The smell of aged leather and metal polish drifted up, scents that always reminded him of his father. Inside lay the physical remains of Officer James Delaney's career. Brass-plated commendations, service medals in velvet boxes, and photographs yellowed at the edges. Mark lifted each item slowly, like handling fragments of broken glass. His father in dress blues, standing proud beside his patrol car, shaking hands with the mayor, always smiling that confident smile that said he knew exactly who he was and what was right. At the bottom, under a stack of certificates, Mark found a leather-bound notebook he'd never seen before. The spine was cracked from use, the pages wavy with age. When he opened it, unfamiliar names filled the lined paper in his father's sharp handwriting. Dates, locations, numbers that made no sense. "I thought I might find you out here." Mark startled at Diane's voice. She stood in the doorway wearing her old fleece robe, concern etched on her face. Without a word, she crossed to him and draped a blanket around his shoulders. The garage was cold. He hadn't noticed until that moment. "I can't sleep," he said, voice rough. "I keep thinking about everything." Diane pulled up an old paint bucket, sat beside him, and waited. The quiet stretched between them like a thread ready to snap. What if... Mark swallowed hard. What if the problems didn't start with Trent? What if they go back further? He handed her the notebook. She flipped through a few pages, frowning. "These don't look like regular police notes," she said softly. Mark pulled his phone from his pocket, fingers hovering over Loretta's number. "I need to know." Diane squeezed his arm. "Then call her." The conversation was brief, careful. 20 minutes later, Mark sat in his truck in the all-night grocery store parking lot, watching Loretta's modest sedan pull up 2 spaces away. She emerged slowly, still favoring her bruised side. Under the harsh, fluorescent lights, she handed him a manila folder. Inside was a photocopy of an old case file, evidence logged for a drug arrest from 15 years ago. Mark's stomach clenched when he saw the badge number at the bottom, his father's. "The evidence in this case vanished before trial," Loretta explained quietly. "The suspect took a plea deal rather than risk fighting the charges. It's one of several similar cases from that period." Mark's throat felt tight. "You knew about this before what happened at the market." "We suspected a pattern that went back years. But Mark," her voice gentled, "I'm not here to attack your father's memory. I'm asking you to consider how silence gets passed down, how good people can convince themselves that wrong things are right if it serves what they think is a greater good." The old defensive anger rose in Mark's chest, the need to protect his father's name, to believe the best, to keep the image of that confident smile untarnished. But then he remembered the sound of Loretta hitting the pavement, the horror on people's faces, the way his own son wouldn't look him in the eye now. He gripped the folder until his knuckles went white. "I won't protect lies," he said. "Not my father's, not mine, not anyone's, even if it costs your career." "Especially then." Mark met her eyes. "My mother used to say character is what you do when it hurts. I forgot that for a while. I won't forget it again." The sky was turning pearl grey when Mark returned home. He placed his father's notebook on the kitchen table where it couldn't be missed. When they came asking questions, and they would come, he would tell them everything he knew. Diane found him there, staring at the notebook. She poured 2 cups of coffee and sat beside him, not speaking, just being present as the sun rose over their changed world. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked sidewalk as Mark approached a modest 2-story apartment building. Paint peeled from the corners, and a rusty bike lay chained to the railing. This was where Loretta had been living her undercover life, blending in perfectly with the other seniors who called this quiet corner of Havenridge home. A young man in a dark windbreaker, clearly FBI from his alert posture, nodded at Mark before methodically checking each window. Once satisfied, he stepped outside, leaving Mark alone with Loretta in her sparsely furnished living room. The space felt temporary, with just a few carefully chosen items to maintain her cover. A worn Afghan draped over a second-hand couch, some romance novels stacked on an end table, and family photos that probably weren't really hers. A small TV sat, silent in the corner, its rabbit ears pointing toward the ceiling. "There's someone you need to meet," Loretta said, settling into an armchair with careful movements that reminded Mark of the harm he'd caused. "Sophia Park. She works as a records clerk at the station." Mark knew Sophia, a quiet Korean-American woman who managed the endless flow of paperwork that kept the department running. She always seemed to fade into the background, which he now realized might be intentional. "She's seen things," Loretta continued, "altered chain of custody forms, missing signatures, dates that don't match. But she's scared, Mark. The The kind of scared that comes from knowing too much in a small town where everyone knows where you live. Mark nodded slowly. They've gotten to her somehow. Not directly, but she's smart enough to see the pattern, how people who speak up tend to have sudden problems. Parking tickets, noise complaints, mysterious damage to their cars. Loretta adjusted her position, wincing slightly as she moved her wrist. Mark noticed the pain flash across her face. You have a follow-up appointment today, don't you? Let me drive you. You shouldn't take a cab. They could be watching. Loretta studied him for a moment before agreeing. That's good thinking. In Mark's car, the silence felt heavy with unspoken words. At a red light, he finally spoke. I need to say something. He gripped the steering wheel tighter. What I did to you, hitting you, it was wrong. Not just illegal or unprofessional. Wrong. And not because you turned out to be FBI, but because I let fear and prejudice control me. I'm deeply ashamed. He didn't add any excuses about stress or training or split-second decisions. The light turned green, and they drove another block before Loretta responded. Forgiveness, she said carefully, is a journey I may choose to take later. But that's my choice to make in my own time. What matters now is the choice in front of you. To tell the truth, no matter what it costs. At the medical center, Mark waited while Loretta had her wrist examined. When she emerged, they headed straight to the church pantry. The familiar smell of coffee and cardboard boxes greeted them as Harold directed, volunteers with his usual gruff efficiency. Mark took his place in the assembly line without comment, sorting canned goods, while stealing glances at Sophia, who had arrived just after them. She looked smaller than he remembered, her shoulders tense as she helped stack boxes near the door. Loretta made her way over to Sophia, moving like any other grandmother volunteer, sharing quiet conversation between tasks. Mark couldn't hear what they discussed, but he saw Sophia's posture gradually relax as Loretta spoke. They worked side by side for almost an hour, their conversation never looking like more than casual chatter about recipes and weather. As the morning wound down, Mark overheard Sophia say softly to Loretta, "Okay, tomorrow then. Same time?" Loretta patted Sophia's hand. "Same time. We'll have tea." Watching them, Mark realized something profound about trust. It wasn't built through dramatic gestures or urgent demands. It grew in small moments, in steady work shared, in gentle words exchanged, in promises kept hour by hour. He thought about his own journey from that terrible moment outside Miller's Market to now, and how each small choice to tell the truth had led him here. Harold's gruff voice broke through his thoughts. "These boxes won't move themselves, Delaney." Mark nodded and got back to work, understanding. That redemption wasn't found in big moments of revelation, but in the quiet dedication to doing what was right. One box, one truth, one moment at a time. The next 3 days moved like molasses. Mark kept his routine simple. Desk duty, pantry shifts, and careful texts to Loretta. Each morning, Sophia slipped him another copied form, her hands shaking as she passed them in manila envelopes marked "Internal Only." By Friday, the station felt different. Eyes followed Mark down hallways. Whispers died when he entered the break room. Even the dispatch clerk, usually chatty, gave him one-word answers. At 2 o'clock, Captain Reynolds called an all-hands meeting. Mark sat in the back, arms crossed. On the projector screen, his own body camera footage played. But something was wrong. The clip showed only Loretta's hand moving toward her purse, then jumped straight to her falling. The middle part, Mark's strike, was gone. "As you can see," Reynolds said, "the situation wasn't as clear-cut as social media suggests." Mark's stomach turned. He recognized the edit job. This was how they buried complaints, cut and splice, twist the truth until victims looked guilty. Back at his desk, a shadow fell across his keyboard. Officer Chen from Internal Affairs stood there, face grim. "Sergeant Delaney, please come with me." They walked to Mark's locker. Chen pulled on latex gloves and opened it. There on the top shelf sat a clear evidence bag containing white powder and cash. Mark's heart stopped. "This was found during a routine inspection," Chen said flatly. "I need your badge and gun." Faces appeared in doorways. Trent leaned against the wall, arms crossed, almost smirking. Mark's fingers felt numb as he unpinned his badge. 23 years, ended with a plant job. He tried calling Loretta 5 times on his way home. straight to voicemail. He texted, "They moved, watch your back." No response. At 7:30 his burner phone buzzed. A text from Harold at the pantry. "Loretta hurt, Memorial Hospital. Hurry." Mark broke speed limits getting there. The emergency room was chaos, Friday night busy. He found Harold in the waiting room, hat crushed in his hands. "Car came out of nowhere," Harold said. "Right after Bible study. Jumped the curb like it was aiming for her. Hit and run." Mark's legs went weak. He sank into a plastic chair under flickering fluorescent lights. A vending machine hummed nearby, casting shadows. Nurses whispered as they passed. One said, "That's him, the cop who hit her." Another replied, "Now this, some people never learn." Everything he touched turned poison. He'd tried to help and only made it worse. Loretta lay somewhere in this building, hurt again, because he wasn't smart enough or fast enough to protect her. The clock ticked past midnight. Mark sat in his car in the hospital parking lot, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. The interstate was 20 minutes away. He could be across state lines by sunrise, start fresh somewhere people didn't know his name or his shame. His hands shook as he turned the key. The engine rumbled to life, its vibration matching the tremor in his chest. The morning light creeps weakly through the hospital windows, casting long shadows in the quiet corridors. Mark's shoes squeak against the polished floor as he walks, clutching a small bag of fresh peaches and a card he's rewritten 3 times. His heart pounds with each step toward room 214. He finds Loretta propped up in bed, her face marked with fresh bruises that make his stomach turn. The full hit and run left her with a sprained shoulder and cracked ribs, but her eyes remain sharp and focused. A rosary rests in her lap, its beads worn smooth from years of prayer. "Brought you something," Mark says softly, placing the fruit on her bedside table. The card stays in his pocket, unsigned. Loretta studies him, then speaks through obvious pain. "You look like you haven't slept. I wanted to leave town," he admits, his voice rough. "Pack up and disappear." She doesn't react with anger or disappointment. Instead, she adjusts herself carefully in the bed and asks, "What kind of man do you want to be when you can't hide anymore?" The question hits him like a physical blow. Mark sinks into the visitor's chair, running his hands over his face. "I don't know how to fix any of this." "Maybe that's not the point," Loretta says. "Maybe it's about doing what's right, even when nothing feels fixed." Mark stands abruptly. "I need to make a call." In the hallway, his hands shake as he dials Pastor Crow's number. The pastor arrives within the hour, his presence solid and grounding. They sit together on hard plastic chairs while nurses bustle past. "I've lost everything," Mark whispers. Pastor Crow's voice is gentle but firm. "You lost what wasn't meant to last. Consequences are real, Mark, but so is redemption. And redemption starts with speaking truth out loud, not to escape punishment, but because it's right." Mark pulls the crumpled card from his pocket, smooths it carefully. "I wrote this last night. An apology, a real one." "Then maybe that's where you start," the pastor says. Back in Loretta's room, Mark clears his throat. "Ma'am, I know I don't deserve your time, but I wrote something. Would you let me read it?" Loretta inclines her head slightly, and Mark unfolds the paper with trembling fingers. "Dear Agent Gaines," he begins, his voice breaking. "I struck you because I was afraid and angry, and because I've spent years making excuses for that fear and anger. I hurt you because I saw your age and your race before I saw your humanity. There's no justification for what I did. It was wrong. It was cruel. And it revealed the darkness I've been carrying and passing on." He has to stop, swallow hard before continuing. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm telling you I'm sorry, truly sorry, and that I'm ready to face whatever comes from telling the whole truth about that day, about everything I've seen, about the corruption my silence has protected." When he finishes, the room is quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Loretta watches him for a long moment, then nods once. "Then let's finish this right." That afternoon, Mark drives to the federal field office downtown. The building looms grey and imposing, but his steps are steady now. Under his arm, he carries his father's notebook and a thick envelope containing his full statement, every detail he can remember about altered reports, missing evidence, and payments that disappeared into friendly pockets. At the security desk, he states his name and purpose clearly. "Mark Delaney. I'm here to give testimony about corruption in the Haven Ridge Police Department." The receptionist makes a call, and soon a serious-faced agent appears to escort him upstairs. As they walk, Mark feels the weight of years lifting, not in forgiveness or freedom from consequences, but in the simple, terrible relief of choosing truth over silence. The morning air bites cold and sharp as Mark adjusts his borrowed tie, the fabric feeling like a noose around his neck. The Federal building looms ahead, all glass and steel. Nothing like the warm brick of the police station he once called home. His shoes click against the marble floor as an agent leads him to Conference Room B. Inside, 3 Federal agents sit with notepads and recording equipment. Their faces are neutral, professional. No judgment, no comfort, just facts needed. Mark takes his seat, the chair cool and unfamiliar. "Start from the beginning," says the lead agent. "Everything you witnessed." Mark's throat feels dry. He takes a small sip of water and begins. "It started with an envelope. I saw Officer Trent Maddox outside the church pantry, passing something to Mike Reynolds. He's a local contractor." The words come slowly at first, then faster. He describes the wire recording, Trent's casual admissions about doctored paperwork and arrests that pay for themselves. When he reaches the part about the planted contraband in his locker, his voice stays steady. No excuses, no self-pity. Then comes the hardest part. Mark straightens his shoulders and looks directly at the agents. "Before any of that, I assaulted Special Agent Gaines. It wasn't stress or training or anything else. I saw an elderly black woman, made assumptions, and I struck her, that's the truth." One of the agents nods slightly, marking something in her notes. Across town, in a small conference room at New Hope Baptist, Sophia Park sits with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her neat blazer can't hide how she trembles. Loretta sits beside her, steady despite her bruises, radiating calm. "Just tell them what you saw," Loretta says softly. "The altered forms, the missing evidence logs, you're doing the right thing." Sophia's voice shakes but grows stronger as she describes years of watching paperwork change, evidence vanish, lives ruined by false charges. She pulls a thick folder from her bag, copies of everything carefully preserved. The morning stretches on, testimonies building brick by brick. Then Mark's phone buzzes. A text from Trent. "Got the ledger. Station lot. Come alone or it disappears." Mark alerts the agents immediately. They craft a quick plan. Mark will stall while surveillance teams get in position. His heart pounds as he drives to the station, knowing what's coming. The parking lot feels eerily empty when he arrives. Trent emerges from behind a patrol car, face twisted with rage. "You really turned rat," Trent spits. "After everything?" "It's over, Trent," Mark says calmly, keeping his hands visible. "Just tell the truth." "Truth?" Trent laughs bitterly. "Like you told the truth about that FBI grandma? Made us all look like thugs?" Movement catches Mark's eye. Sophia, approaching with her folder, right on schedule. But something's wrong. Trent sees her too, and his control snaps. "You little snitch," he snarls, lunging toward Sophia. Mark moves without thinking, stepping between them as Trent swings. The blow catches Mark's jaw, sending him stumbling. But he stays upright, arms spread, shielding Sophia. "Help!" Mark shouts, and the lot erupts with activity. Federal agents and state troopers emerge from every direction. Trent tries to run but doesn't make it 3 steps before he's tackled. As they pin him down, one agent pries open a hidden compartment in Trent's patrol car. Inside lies a black leather notebook, the ledger, filled with dates and dollar amounts. Mark watches, tasting blood from his split lip, as agents cuff Trent's hands behind his back. Nearby, Loretta stands quietly observing, leaning on her cane but straight-backed with relief. 2 more agents approach Mark with handcuffs. He doesn't resist or argue. He holds his wrists out, accepting accountability, even as he knows he finally did right. As they lead him away, Sophia catches his eye and gives a small nod of thanks. This isn't a victory lap or a hero's exit, it's just truth, finally breaking through years of silence.